Hi, part two. Fair use, educational purposes. Like I said, I keep saying it only applies to the person. I'm not a person. I'm a man, an individual. Why people experience a zero-sum bias. There are several cognitive mechanisms that cause people to experience a zero-sum bias. Mistaken belief in limited resources. See, and that's what the Globe's done. It's made people have the zero-sum bias that resources are finite and everything else, you know what I mean? Stuck here in this little ball, on this, well, it's not little, but this ball, you know what I mean, and everything, all the spheroid, pear shape, whatever they want to call it. In many cases, people intuitively assume that a certain resource is more limited than is actually the case. For example, people often believe the lump of labour fallacy, which is the idea that there is a fixed amount of labour to be distributed within an economy so that the entry of new people into the job market comes at the direct expense of others. Mistaken belief in trade-off consistency. In situations where people assess the attractiveness of different options in a given choice set, they often display compensatory inferences when they assume that there must be a trade-off between the various advantages and disadvantages of each option, so that the options must be balanced overall. This can lead people to discount the advantages of superior options, or to ignore the disadvantages of inferior options, since they assume that they must be balanced by some unseen disadvantages in the case of discounted advantages, or by unseen advantages in the case of ignored disadvantages. Common correlations. Certain types of trade-offs or problems tend to be frequently correlated with each other, which can cause people to assume that they exist, even in situations where they don't. For example, this can cause people to assume that superior performance in an electric device entails that the device must have poor battery life. The two traits are often correlated. Previous experience. In some cases, people mistakenly assume that a certain situation is zero-sum because they were exposed to a similar situation in the past that were in fact zero-sum. Accordingly, people who live in situations where resources are more scarce tend to display a greater degree of zero-sum beliefs. When it comes to interactions between people, a failure to see people's perspective can also cause people to display a zero-sum bias in various situations. For example, when people trade something, each of them might view the exchange as being beneficial for different reasons. Failing to see that different people might have different reasons for taking action can lead to the incorrect assumption that they must both be motivated by the exact same factors, which would make it much more likely that the exchange is zero-sum in nature. Finally, note that people's tendency to display zero-sum thinking has been proposed to be an evolutionary adaptation. No, I don't think it is. I think people's tendency to display zero-sum thinking is because of social engineering. There's all these agendas out there for all these different things, like all these false dichotomies of us versus them and men versus women, different races versus different races of people, different ethnic groups, stuff like that, whatever you want to call them, and all the other stuff. It's all engineered that way. So we're all like in the zero-sum bias, and we're all fighting against each other for competition and for resources and stuff like that, when it doesn't have to be like that. Yeah. This is because for the majority of our history, most resources were highly limited, and so this sort of thinking could have encouraged people to compete for them when necessary. Because the zero-sum bias is so widespread, this form of thinking is considered to be a notable feature of folk economics, which is an intuitive view of economics that is held by people who have relatively little formal knowledge on the topic. Next one will be how to avoid the zero-sum bias. Okay, thank you.